Okay, so now after understanding the cells, let's see the tissue. We understand that tissue is basically a group of cells that they found together in the body, usually a group of similar cells they found in the body, and they have common embryonic origin. Now, histology is studying these tissues under microscope. So it's the microscopic study of tissue appearance, organization, and function. Just a term that we need to be aware of. Okay. In our body, we have four basic types of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous system. And the good news is that we are going to keep the muscle and the nervous system for later, since we are going to study muscles in individual chapter, and the nervous system we are going to study it in maybe 4 chapters, okay, toward the end. So we are not going to focus so much about these tissues now, just touch base on them. So most of our focus would be on these two, epithelial and connective tissue. For epithelial tissues, from their name, epithelial, it means like large sheet of cells, and they are covering surfaces of the body, technically all of the surface in our body. What does it mean, all of our surfaces in body, whether they are internal or external? External, you can think of the skin. We will see it in the coming chapter. So basically in our skin, the outer layer of our skin is epithelial tissue. So we are looking at our epithelial tissue when we are looking at each other, okay, if you want to put it in this way. And then the internal surfaces. Think, for example, any internal surface, like the lining of the stomach, for example. That is made out of epithelial tissue. Technically, the lining of the digestive system, all of it is epithelial tissue. The lining of the lungs, okay, the lining of the lungs is also made out of epithelial tissue, and so on. The lining of the blood vessels, okay, all of this is epithelial tissue, and so on. So any lining inside or outside the body, that is definitely epithelial tissue. So one of the major forms of the epithelial tissue is covering and lining epithelia, okay? And the other form is the glandular tissue. These are secretory tissues in glands, like salivary glands or sweat glands. All of them are glandular tissue. Now, if we want to put function for the entire epithelial tissue, it's hard because they are performing different functions. As you can see here, it's for protection, absorption, filtration, exertion, secretion, and sensory reception. So it's wide variety of functions. So we will see for each one of these functions an example and a location that is associated with these functions. But before that, we can see some special characteristics of epithelial tissue. I'm skipping this slide because I believe it's pretty straightforward. You can read it and understand it. So let's see the special characteristics of epithelial tissues. For these type of tissues, they have 4 major characteristics. The first one, that the cells exhibit something called polarity. What does it mean? That there are differences, or there is differences in structure and function, okay, between 2 sides of the cell. What does this mean? Let's go to here. If you remember, we said one of the functions, for example, or one of the places in the for the epithelial tissue was inside the stomach, okay? This is not really a stomach. Inside the stomach, like this. Okay? Let's assume that this is the stomach, and here the lining is epithelial tissue. or actually maybe even a better example is the small intestine. Maybe yes, the small intestine is far better example. So here, this is the small intestine, okay? And the lining of the small intestine, as we said, we have epithelial tissue. So let's take part of the small intestine and increase it. Here, this is the wall of small intestine, and here are the epithelial cells. So these are epithelial cells. If we zoom into these cells, we will find that, for example, their nucleus is toward the bottom, okay? Whereas other organelles like Golgi apparatus, for example, might be here, okay? Something like this. Remember that this is a small intestine, so the food is into this area, right? This is the area of the food. This is the other wall. So on the other side, there will be these cells, and this is their nuclei. So you can see here that there are two surfaces. One surface of the cell that is facing the food, okay, and this surface usually called apical surface. And then there is another surface, which is this one, the attachment of the cell to the wall of the small intestine. This is called the basal surface. So the apical surface usually is the one that is open to the cavity, open to the external surface, right? Whereas the basal one is the attachment, where the cell is attached to the other structures. Now, one of the characteristics, or the first characteristic of this epithelial tissue, that the functions and locations of organelles are different between the two areas or the two surfaces. So this is the first characteristic of epithelial tissue, that there is always this arrangement. Like, for example, in this case, we put the nuclei toward the bottom, so the nuclei always going to be toward the bottom. So if we have like 100 million of these cells, their nuclei will always be like this, okay, and so on. Mitochondria might be toward the top, for example, okay, these are the mitochondria, and something like this. So this is the first characteristics. No, sorry, which one? This one. Okay, now, so this is number one. Now, number two, that epithelial cells are always supported by connective tissue. Okay, they are always supported by connective tissue. So here, for example, this layer beneath it, here, is connective tissue. And that is always, whenever you find epithelial tissue, beneath it, it will be connective tissue. And usually they will be connected through a layer of cells called basal lamina. Think of this like two two faces of adhesive materials. So cells would get attached to here and also attached to here. So this is kind of supporting to the epithelial tissues, because epithelial tissues usually they are not very strong. They need a connective tissue to support them. Okay? So that is the second characteristic. The third one, that epithelial tissue are almost always avascular. What does it mean, avascular? It means there is no blood supplies or no blood vessels going through the epithelial tissue. So epithelial tissue, if you cut epithelial tissue, no bleeding, no blood. So how do they get their food, oxygen, and so on? By diffusion. However, with that being said, they are avascular, however they are innervated. What does this mean, innervated? It means they have nerve supplies. So there are nerves running within the epithelial tissue. That's why we feel pain, for example. Okay? So this is the third one. And the fourth one, and this is something very unique to the epithelial tissue, not all the tissues in our body can do it, is regeneration. They can easily regenerate and replace themselves. That's why, for example, like a small scratch on your skin, it will take like 3 to 4 days and it will be gone. Or if you burn your mouth, or you cut through your skin, or there is a burn on your skin, like a few days and it can go away. Why? Because they have this ability to regenerate. So this is something very unique to the epithelial tissue. Unique in terms of the speed, in terms of the efficiency, in terms of the scale. For example, we are talking about the entire skin that can be regenerated within 45 days or so. Okay? Now, another function or another characteristic or another feature of epithelial cells, that their ability, or not ability, their location, their attachment to each other. Now, epithelial cells, as we said, they are going to form lining, covering. So they have to have like a strong connection between them. Otherwise, each cell would get separated or broken or teared off alone. And this will counteract their purpose as a covering. Usually, within the epithelial cells, there are 3 forms of junctions. There is the tight junctions, there is something called desmosums, and there is the gap junctions. We will see briefly each one of them. Tight junction, think of the word tight. These are extremely tough, okay, types of proteins that they are running around the cell. So if this is a cell, like this is the 3D shape of a cell, and this is another cell. I know my drawing. Okay, so these would come and wrap around both cells. There should be like more close to each other, so I'm going to draw a third cell here. Okay, think of them if you have a group of like sticks, okay, and you want to have a tape around them, right? So this is the tight junction. It provides very tough connection between the cells. It's so tough that it won't allow any substances between the cells. So there is no extracellular space between them, and the movement of substances through this space or through the extracellular space between the cells is blocked. So there is no movement between the cells with the tight junction. Okay, so it's tough, very strong, and no exchange of materials like water or ions. No change. These are the two things about the tight junction I want you to be aware of. The second one, I will skip the smosms and I will go back to it, but I will talk about gap junction. Gap junction, from its name, it suggests that there is a window, there is a gap between the cells. As you can see here, there is a gap between the cells. This is one cell, this is another cell. So there is like these windows between the plasma membranes of these cells. So the gap junction is not really for connection. It's not a strong connection. So it's very weak connection wise. However, it will allow materials, exchange of materials. It allows exchange of materials between the cells. Like water, ions, sometimes sugar, sometimes protein, and so on. Some of these materials might be allowed to exchange between the cells. Okay, so this is the gap junction. So at one end we have the tight junction, very strong, no exchange of materials. At another end we have the gap junction. So this is the tight, this is the gap junction, very weak, and it allows exchange of material. In the middle we will have desmosms. This is a mix between the two. It's tough, okay, flexible, and allows exchange of materials. Mainly water. Water, in some cases there are like sodium and potassium, like very limited. Not so, no sugar, for example, can pass between or through desmosms. Okay, the thing again about desmosms that it's tough, flexible, and it allows exchange of materials. So it's kind of between tight junction and gap junction. And desmosms, for example, it's very abundant in skin. For example, see, for example, if you go to the beach and you get some bath, few days after that your skin would start to peel, and it will be like layers, right? It will be like layers of skin of dead cells. These layers, these dead cells, are still attached to each other because of desmosms. Okay, so that's how tough desmosms is. Now let's see another thing about epithelia, then I will stop the video and start a new one. That is the classification of epithelial cells. Now these cells can be classified in two ways. And the first one is the number of layers. So if it's one layer, it's simple. If there are more than one layer, these are stratified. Okay, so this is the first way. And the second way is the shape of the cell. If it's flat, these are called squamous. If it's like a cube, these are cuboidal. Okay, and if they are tall, these are columnar. So squamous, it's flat, cuboidal, it's like a cube, and columnar, they are tall. Okay, so which means that we have squamous, simple squamous, stratified squamous, simple cuboidal, stratified cuboidal, and simple columnar and stratified columnar, as you can see. When we are talking about stratified, it's more than one layer of cells, 2 or more. Okay, and usually the outer layer is the one will take the shape. Okay, but importantly, these types of tissues, these four, these four are the most abundant one. Whereas these two are very rare. So we won't see so much examples of them. We'll focus more on the other four: the simple and stratified squamous, the simple cuboidal, and the simple columnar. Okay, I will stop here, take a break, and then you can come and see the examples and the feature of each one of these layers.